Wandering around. So this is free form if you haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, so our strategy is just to wing it. So we figure we could handle that. But I'm really happy the way Mike set it up for us, because I was kind of wondering, I've been in engineering my whole life, it seems like, and I was kind of wondering, what am I going to do without slides? But he had a great intro for us, and it was kind of like the things that I had thought about, what would I tell about as far as our journey, what we're doing, and how have I been successful so far in scalability.
So how many folks aren't successful at scaling? Just kind of get a baseline. Let's go on. Raise a show of hands. How many folks don't even want to raise their hand? All right. All right. Well, let's try something else. How many folks in here can draw? That's a great question. How many folks in here can sing? So I used to be a school teacher. If I go to a kindergarten class and I ask that question, what happens? So do you know that the number one indicator how successful you're going to be at transformation or scaling or anything else has everything to do with how you answer those two questions? That if you said to yourself, I can't draw, or if you're resistant to raise your hand, or that you can't sing, right? The fact is you can draw. You may draw poorly, you may sing poorly like me. But the risk that you may embarrass yourself, right, in drawing poorly, or the risk that you may embarrass yourself by singing poorly is really small compared to the risk you're about to take with your business to transform it. And you ought to be ashamed of yourself, right? Because you're risking everything by transforming. The fact is, you got to want to do this. And so that scalability thing, right, that we're about to talk about, has everything to do with your intent and your desire to achieve it. And it starts for us getting the problem right. The things that we have done poorly on when it comes to scale have started with the definition of the problem. If we don't get the problem right, we can't scale it. And if we don't have the infrastructure to allow us to scale it, we have to rethink what success in that scalability looks like and what we're trying to learn. Does that make sense? So the folks that's done scale well, what about the problem helped you scale it? All right, who wants to start? Who's done something that scaled that worked well? What about definition of the problem helped you scale it? Because that's where it all starts.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Seasaltz from Dow. And I have been successful at scaling, and yes, you gotta want it. But the story I was thinking about is, so we've talked about our enterprise manufacturing intelligence program for years, some even at this conference. And about a year ago, and we are from a central organization, like a leveraged organization within manufacturing. And about a year ago, these people from this other department came up with this idea, like, oh, what if we keep data kind of in between our experts in our equipment and the people who do maintenance at the plants? And what if we use data to have them talk about what's going on and have the people who are not at the site be aware of what's going on because they're looking at the data? And I was a little perturbed because I thought, well, that's what my group does. But then I realized that it actually was the best thing that had happened, because this other group who had these maintenance people and had to keep an eye on these various pieces of equipment, they finally saw where you can use data, and that they wanted it was actually the best thing that happened. Even though at first I thought, well, am I falling down in my job? But the answer was no, I didn't. I showed them enough that then they could kind of take it and go, oh yeah, that's what we'll do with it. So there's my story.
I think that's great. If you don't mind my saying, the point about data and also the analogy that you made, Mike. When we talk about what we can do I was raised, and the way I run my department is that anything is possible. You just have to figure out how. And we do that with data. We take all the emotion out of the conversation by only talking about facts. Now, it drives my team nuts because they all want to argue and cry and fuss and whatever about what they believe is the most important thing. But we pull up the data. If you see me go to the whiteboard and start drawing pictures, you know that there's an argument going on and I don't like it. We're going to come to a conclusion using data. And if you can bind everyone together on that common theme, I think that's really useful to do.
Anybody else got a good story on scalability? There you go. Well, that's what this is really all about. I got lots of them, but you'll get bored hearing me talk.
Hi, Kevin Wilhelm with Eli Lilly. We had an executive in our business about 10 years or so ago, and he was brilliant at scaling. And the approach that I saw him make was, one, he knew what he wanted. He had a vision. He was an outstanding sponsor. And the key thing was he would pre-invest in buying technology so that when sites were ready for it, it was already invested in and it was, quote, free to them. And it removed excuses for them to not utilize that technology. Sometimes it took a bit of time for them to realize they had a business problem to pull the technology solution, but when they were ready to pull, the solution was there and it made it easy for them to pull. And I thought he was brilliant at doing it. He did that on an MES program, he did that on some historian platforms, he did that on a number of different types of technologies, and he was brilliant at making it easy for those businesses to consume that technology.
Field of dreams, right? You build it and they will come. Right? So we've learned to scale. We're not always successful. So you guys want to hear a story of somebody that is a vendor of ours, right? Who may or may not want to talk about how good or not we scale. You want to talk? What's it like to work with us on scale? Tell them. Don't be shy.
Well, I think, one of the statements earlier, the whole crawl, walk, run mentality, I think that's what really needs to take place when you're, oh, sorry, Matt Cowan, I work for KCF Technologies. We got close to 100,000 sensors deployed within Georgia Pacific within their multiple divisions, but I think really what it takes is finding a champion within the corporation, but then partnering with them and almost doing a road show to go into the trenches and educate how beneficial this technology is going to work at the ground level. Ideally, you need to tie in maintenance or reliability professionals, but really where the key success is going to be, especially with Industry 4.0, it's the operations guys. These guys need visibility as to how much they're damaging their equipment based on their operational and process decisions. So, for me, it's been a 4-year relationship, and it's exploded within the last 2 years. But you have to be prepared to grow quickly with a company like Georgia Pacific. So it's been a wild ride, but it's been extremely educational for me, and of course for our company. So, thanks.
So when it works, be careful what you wish for. So anybody else got a good scale story? Because Ben just walked in, right? Everybody say hi to Ben Blanchett, right? So I brag on Ben all the time, right? And the reason I brag on Ben is because if you look at our company, we started this journey knowing that the face of our company would change. And it would change generationally, right? So it would look not like me, it would look a whole lot more like him. And so we didn't really know how to scale. We stumbled our way through it. And so we hired somebody that knew how to scale. And we've already talked about, Ben, that it started with how we defined the problem. Because we weren't very good at defining problems, right? And we're still learning how to define problems and how to go forward in that. So we have another example of folks that have scaled really, really well, because I have an example where we scaled really, really well, and we didn't define the problem, and we said, thou shalt do this. But I won't tell that story yet. Anybody got another story?
Barbara Magel with Dow. And I'm going to tell two stories, a success and a failure. It was the exact same team, and both of them times they were trying to implement software into construction. And both times the pilots were wildly successful by every measure they were set up to do. The first time, though, there was no pre-advertising of what was happening. We went in, identified a construction team to work with, and we implemented the technology on it, and it showed a tremendous return on investment by actual hard dollar measurement, money out the door. We actually could measure it's hard to do that with a lot of software, but we actually had a software where we measured the actual savings in hard dollars. And at the end, we thought we had a great success, and the guy we were working with on it, the construction manager, and said, well, that was interesting, but nah, we don't want to do that. And we're like, how can you say that? It was a big success. It was a large, hard dollar, but he was just like, nope, moving on, moving on, moving on. And it was, we were all shaking our heads like, what just happened there? And then we had another time. Again, we're going to try to roll out new software into construction. The same project managers, the same lead in the IT side. But this time, we had a wonderful person working on cultural change management, and she advertised the hell out of this. Everybody knew what was happening, what the measurements of success were, advertised well beyond the project, such that when it was a big success, it was really hard for the construction manager to then to say, well, we aren't going to do that. And the second technology is now scaling faster than the team can roll it out. I mean, the demand for it is much larger than the team can hire people to implement it. So it's been a big success, and it's scaling really fast.
That's great feedback, because we're also doing that in Covestro, but our strategy is to be as visible as possible, and they forced me to do it as well. So we're advertising internal and external what we're doing in digitalization, and we're doing things where we're taking it to the plants and trying to engage people. And actually, next week in our Baytown plant, we'll have Element Analytics and Seek on our site to actually show people what we can do with the tools to try and get some early engagement and adopters.
So I'm going to tell our story, and then I'm going to give the microphone to Ben, because Ben built our collaboration support center, and which is the foundation of what we are going forward. And so several years ago, we were out looking at things, and I saw, I'm going to say technology, and Ben's going to cringe because he's going to correct me in a minute. And I saw this technology, and at the time, I was looking for something that would drive a stake in the ground from which we could never come back from, ever, right? And so it was an analytics engine that would optimize all of our facilities from one end to the other. And it would set in our ecosystem, and that I knew that if we put this thing in place, that it really, and I'm going to say this, Ben, was a methodology that would change us at the very core of who we were, would never, ever survive it in the way that we were. And that once we did it, there was no return. But in order to do that, guess what we had to do? Now, you're talking about changing a company that has never said, thou shalt. So I played a card. I sent an email, or top level of our company. And we got a thou shalt. And we did it. And we done it in a very short period of time. And our company has never been the same since. And it wasn't about the technology. It was about what we became after it that mattered. So Ben will talk about scale. Yeah. So what we become after.
So, yeah, hey, thanks, Mike, for putting me on the spot. I didn't have anything prepared. So, No, I think Mike's right. I want to. He tells that story like it's, like it's really simple, and the reality was he sent the email. They got a thou shalt, and we had about 20 something sites we were targeting deployment at, and a methodology, not a tool, and a new approach to doing things, not a technology. We got told this is the way we're going to try to do things, and it took about 8 months for us to get 4 sites up and running, 3 sites. Everybody had negotiated a different contract, did a slightly different thing, and then we kind of said, well, this isn't working, even though we had thou shalt. So Mike started trying to figure out how to manipulate the situation, which is what he does for a living. And so we took everybody, and this is about scalability. I'll get to the point in a second. Was get everybody in the room who has a stake in this, the business leaders, the operational leaders, help them understand where they have a gap and where others are doing things better than them, and create a need. And once you create a need for something like that, then they're like, hey, I wish I had a way to do this. And then you go, I've got this thing in my pocket that we've been trying to do for 8 months. We've got to 4 sites. Why don't we just do that? It might not be the right thing, but it's something. Worst case, we're going to learn something. We're probably not going to lose our shirts if we do it. And so let's just go do it. Like, let's just get out of our own way. And from that point on, I think we did the next 16 sites or 15 sites in less than 8 months. So 4 in 8 months, and then the rest in the next 8 months. So scalability, Mike says I know how to scale. I don't know how to scale. What I know how to do is listen to what people need. And so when you talk to an operations leader, a lot of times they'd say, I need wireless vibration. KCF was talking about that earlier. I need wireless vibration. And the way I hear is, well, why? Why do you need wireless vibration? Well, because I have less people on the floor who can go and do rounds. Okay, well, why do you have less people on the floor who can do rounds? Well, because there's just labor availability of those experts is going down. Well, why is that? Well, because they're all leaving to work for another company. Well, why? Because we're so far behind in our reliability practices that it's like a sinking ship and the rats are leaving. So what are we doing about it? Well, we're hiring more people and putting wireless sensors in. Well, why are you trying to do something you know you can't do? Let's do more of the hire people when we know we can't keep them. And let's do wireless sensors, and then we'll sit back and hope. And so hope isn't a strategy. I don't care. Hope's not a strategy. So what we did is said, okay, your real problem is reliability. You have a reliability problem, and you got a knowledge problem. So how do I take technology, new ways of working, new methodologies, reliability problem, and smash that all together and come up with a new way to take full advantage of best available technology to make our limited knowledge and skilled resources more productive? Sounds pretty simple, right? And so we started doing that, and the reason there's been an uptick in the acceleration of our adoption of sensors and deployment of sensors is not because we're deploying sensors. We were doing that before. But now we realize what the value is in terms of taking out the requirement to have people at sites with knowledge and skills to do something with the data. And once we figured out a way to take full advantage of the technologies that are out there, now there's a compelling need. And as soon as there's a compelling need and we demonstrate the value, we can't get enough sensors installed fast enough. So scalability is all about creating a need, but it really helps if you understand the problem first, and it really helps if you only work on things that are scalable. If you're going to work on onesie, twosies, point solutions, you'll never, ever scale it. So only work on things that are scalable, and then it's easy to scale stuff.
So what you folks heard me talk about was the value of peers, right? The value of peers is not about you coming here and finding a peer and copying the thing, right? And Jim and I are peers. If you don't think like your peer thinks, you're not capturing the value of a peer. You're just looking for the thing and hunting for the easy button. And so if you're failing at scalability, it's because you're trying to do it the easy way, right? And so that's probably the greatest lesson in all of this. If you're going to scale, it is not easy. You have to frame the problem, get the problem right, and intentionally do it so you can scale it, right?
How much does competition, internal competition, competition between units, how does that affect scaling? Or does it help it? These units got to compete. They did something great. I got to get one of those.
we've lived all sides of that. Your incentives can help you and they can destroy you, right? And so if you're not careful, look out, right? Because if you have an incentive system that's based on an individual contribution, you could be in trouble. And so what people do is they want to forego everything else, right, for the benefit of their own contribution toward the value that's created in that marginal effect on what they've done, right? How that value of what they've done helps the outcome. And they'll do that in spite of what the goal is for the company. And so you have to have a careful balance of, guys, all ships have to rise. And if this is a better idea, then we have to help that become a reality. And have some intellectual honesty about what you're trying to achieve. Because it's really scary sometimes in organizations just how counterproductive individual incentives can be. Because we see it in a lot of organizations.
We did tackle that problem, actually, because we have pockets of excellence all over the world. So my first year in the position was to go visit these 40 sites and see what's going on. And it's wide range, and there's a lot of shadow IT efforts and things going on. So we basically got an understanding of what are all these things going on, and went and selected, okay, what's going to work for everybody, and start getting that engagement. And since there were these pockets of excellence, like in Brunsbüttel, they did some mobile working stuff, we're taking that and we're rolling it out. But they feel included, and they feel like the stuff that comes to them, they're also going to accept it because they've been accepted. And we're trying to take the best of all those and actually introduce it around the world. So it's been helpful to actually find those and engage them.
I think it's an interesting question. My experience, and we've gone the evolution where we did a lot of internal competition kind of stuff back in it, and I would say this is probably 15 years ago when we used to do that. My point of view is there's nothing that destroys enterprise value faster than internal competition between plants. And I think that so what we do today is what we've been doing is a lot of benchmarking. I think similar to what Jane just said. All right, there's always plants that are going to be better than others. There's always teams that work better together than others. And whether we're looking at TPM or we're looking at technology and the way we operate plants, we try to highlight the areas where people are moving ahead and creating traction and value in the enterprise. And then we bring it back as a learning opportunity for the rest of the organization. And, if our mantra right now is about being a learning organization, because if you're not learning in this space and you're not experimenting and you're not failing and driving successes, I think in the end of the day, you're not really moving the whole ball forward in the right way. And so what good does it do me if, for example, our probably best performing plant in one of our segments is in China today? But what good does it do me if they're the only plant in my whole segment that operates really well? They service a limited market. Because of tariffs and other things, we can't even export out of it into the United States right now because of the cost. So really, their impact on the overall results of my organization is going to be small. So I think we've got to find a way in what we seek for ways is, okay, who's moving fast? How are they moving fast? What can we do? And we'll bring it back into an operations discussion and say, okay, look, we even have today we still do have entitlement conversations. Like, okay, for this particular manufacturing platform, this plant is performing at, let's just say, 95% efficiency. I've got 4 other plants that make essentially the same product mix that are operating somewhere between 89 and 95%. So what's holding the laggards back from the leader? Why? How are we looking at that? Are there technology gaps? If there are, we can close those. If there's skill gaps, we can figure out how to close those, et cetera. So the days of where we used to, and we still do, from a recognition standpoint, gold plan awards, silver plan awards, bronze plan awards, but they're less about, that plan is kicking everybody else's ass, right? It's more about they're teaching the organization, they're showing the organization where they're going, and we're actually holding them up like lighthouses versus ships in the dark, right?
Let me put you guys on the spot a little bit to explore that, because that's interesting. That presupposes a culture you described where experimentation is okay. Yet there's a broad group of folks in here that are not at that culture yet. They're still really bound by transactional leadership. So how do you get from there to here? Because that's, in the transactional leadership arena, as you well know, the folks on the front line are having to prove things and having to do things that they're not equipped to do, they're not allowed to do, and they have to prove the value of when they've not done them before. So how do you guys think through moving that culture? What helps?
We talk about experiment all the time. I found that word's got a really big, broad kind of connotation, different things, different people. How many of you consider it an experiment if it has less than a 25% chance of success? Like that's if it's a 1 in 4 chance of it failing, would you call that an experiment? A couple of people.
A 1 in 4 chance of failing?
Yeah, you have a 1 in 4. I'm sorry, you have a 1 in 4. Yeah, you have a 1 in 4 chance of failing. It's highly likely you'll succeed.
Yeah.
That counts as
Sure.
an experiment.
Well, I mean, we experiment with everything. I mean, we've tried all kinds of stuff, and whatever we like, we move forward on it. We don't look at it as what fails or not. It's we find what works and we implement.
So if you had a 1 in 4 chance of succeeding, if it was like low probability, would you call that an experiment? Would you even not do it? I'm trying to find the threshold how we think about experiment, because the way I think about it is, if I do something and I know it's going to work, that's not an experiment. That's a pilot, right? And a lot of times, if your leadership doesn't give you the ability to go try things that have a high likelihood, 50% chance of you failing, then you're never going to succeed because you won't be allowed to experiment enough, right? So all you can do is make the experiment small enough so you minimize the risk, containerize it, take a thin enough slice that no one's going to say no because it's not worth saying no to because it's really small. But every time you do one of those things, make sure it's got a high likelihood of failing, 50-50 chance of failing or succeeding. That's an experiment, right?
Well, you have to fail fast and accept it. And there's plenty that we experimented with that we put aside and said, okay, that was a waste of money to go on to the next thing. And yeah, of course, yes.
So-
How do you get your leadership to allow you to think through what you both described?
We just do it. Yeah, so what we did is we just did it. And so I have a certain budget, and it's not that much, not compared to IT and like the business units and stuff. But we took that budget and we said, okay, we're going to explore every single one of these channels with this budget. And when something works, then we ask for more money. But we just didn't ask permission. We showed them the results of what we could do afterwards.
Was there a tipping point?
There was for us.
Was there a tipping point where you saw a transition, where you started to recognize that, okay, maybe we can get this over the hump?
Well, I'm pretty stubborn actually, and I don't give up. So yeah, there's a lot of that, but you do finally get to that point where you have that aha moment. Oh, I see what that is, and that is really worth the effort to get there, because then you really start get this rapid buy-in and people get excited about it.
For us, there was. It was basically all accumulation, and so to kind of dig in a little bit. A lot of it, is it valuable if we kind of go into that a little bit, kind of how you get leadership engaged in this? Because we've done it, right? Is that a good exercise to kind of talk about that for you guys? Would that be valuable? All right. So I'm going to pick on you for a minute, right? If I walk up to you and I say, I want to go spend $1.5 million. Will you let me go spend $1.5 million? What are you going to say? What's the odds? It's your money. It's your money. We've never done it before, ever, right? Asking me the returns, I'm going to lie, right? Because there's no way I can calculate the return on something I've never done before.
Sounds so familiar.
Right. Right. So the answer is going to be no, right? Because most of the time when you ask somebody for yes, right? Most often people feel the most comfortable answer is no. This is psychology, basic psychology. So what you need to do is you need to change your approach, right? And what you want to do with folks is you want to go ask a question where the answer is no, but it means yes.
We have a question up here too.
Hi. I apologize for coming in a bit later, but I'm trying to understand when you say experiment and you're asking to spend 1.5 million, what scale are we talking about here? A POC, a pilot, or what are you asking for?
Just trying to learn something.
On
You're
what
doing some exercise where you have to spend money in order to get some kind of knowledge that gives you insight as to whether or not a hypothesis that you have is correct.
A technology or a change in process?
Or a methodology, typically. Because mostly it's not about the technologies. Mostly it's about how it changes you and how you behave, right?
It gets back to the problem definition, correct? Of really scoping out that problem in terms of what you want to do to improve it, and then what you need to learn becomes more obvious to you. And then the scope of it is really probably there's tolerance within companies are different in terms of that. But the experiment is established along the lines of a problem that's clearly defined.
I mean, in terms of digitalization, our leadership are very engaged, and we have a process for what you're talking about. But you have to show the value against other projects. You don't present your idea in isolation. So that is the process.
Yeah.
You're competing against other ideas, and it's sort of presented 3 times a year, and you get the money if it succeeds, and it's one of the value chains that's determined.
So you're fairly mature in the process. A lot of these
Well, I
folks,
didn't think so, but now I guess we do.
yeah. So
I'll report back.
yeah. So a lot of these folks aren't, right? And so if you're trying to get your organization to start, right, one of the ways to do this is to say, would it be a bad idea if, right? And the results and the effect on our organization would be X, Y, Z. And this is what we would learn. And the benefits of that would look like this, right? And if you frame it in that context, right, then the answer is obviously no. And people are a lot more comfortable saying no than they are saying yes. And my advice, because we've done this, and this is the way Ben and I operate inside our organization, don't do it with a piece of paper. Don't do it with a PowerPoint. Do it on a whiteboard. And engage them in a conversation where you layer in context and you draw it. And so if you want executives, right, and I'm talking about C-suite people, if you want executives to learn, get them in to help you to solve the problems by telling them you're working on something, you're trying to figure it out, right? And then would it be a bad idea if we thought about this way, right? And it works, right? But don't take more than 30 minutes. And then plan out a series of meetings where you go through this exercise and you end up in a much, much different place. So this is not a project like you were describing. You were describing we're going to go do these projects. This is about affecting the way people think, right? So what you want to do is you want to change their mindset from one thing, right, and make them think differently right now, and then over time, the entire trajectory of your company changes because you've affected the way they think, right? So we're on here thinking about industrial transformation. What if I told you it didn't matter? Would you walk out of here thinking differently, right, if I told you it didn't matter? Wow, look at you.
Thank you. Peter Sieber with HEMA. Probably in order to get started, I need to tell you we are a little bit a different company. We are a traditional German-based so-called family-owned business existing since 110 years now. And I think when looking at transformation, when looking at experiments to make, we are in a continuous transformation. And what is most important from my point of view is that we have to keep on mind that technology is a tool, technology is an enabler, right? But at the end of the day, we have to look at the people we have. Because if we cannot motivate the people we have to accept what we are going to do, we will fail. And having a dedicated technology and running around with the mindset up to say, okay, I have a solution here, now let's find the problem that fits to the solution, is the wrong way around. And what I'm a little bit afraid of is that a lot of people actually are exactly in this mood setup, right? Now, talking about my personal experiences, a little bit less than 3 years ago, I had a face-to-face meeting with our CEO. And our CEO said, well, Peter, you know, we're actually facing some problems in our Chinese organization. Would you be ready to go over there for 3 months and helping them to get back on speed? And I thought to myself, go to hell, right? But, geh zur Hölle. But I heard myself saying, okay, boss, I'm underway. Now that is, it will be 3 years in August this year, hopefully, when I'm allowed to get back to China somehow. But the interesting thing was that what I found was an organization that was totally dominated by uncertainties. The people were uncertain on how to move ahead. The people were uncertain how to cope with the colleagues. The people were uncertain with the way how to cope with our customers' recommendations, right? You know what I did first? I started learning Chinese. And the rationale for that was that it became very clear to me in the very first moment that if I want to be successful, I have to form a team. And if I have to form a team, I need to understand the motivation of the team members. I need to understand how to drive the people, how to motivate the people, right? And all this has nothing to do with digital elements, with digital transformation. Of course, such a transformation process can be supported by technology, can be supported by digitized tools. But if you do not have the basics under control, if you did not do the basic homework, all these tools are not very effective in my eyes, right? So from my point of view, when talking about the transformation process, to summarize what I just said, the most important thing is that we have to look at the people who should implement this, and who should live in the workplace we create. This is the most important. Priority number 2 is whatever we do has to help us. And at the end of the day, the most of the companies I know are around to make money in one way or the other, right? And we can do a lot of things. But if the things that we do not help us in order to achieve this overall objective, I think we should critically think about whether we're doing the right things, right?
I think that's great information because it really comes down to the people. And I'm curious, who in the room is not able to scale? Who's having a problem? And what kind of problems are you facing or what issues do you have? So can we hear about a problem?
Jonathan Alexander with Albemarle. So when it comes to, we have the same capital project plan that she talked about, you know, where you have this huge long list of things and you got this much money and it stops right here and then you fight over the line of which one gets pulled off and which one gets pushed on. And I think that when it comes to experimenting or getting our leaders to buy in, to kind of say, okay, let's take a chance. It's an easier sell to say, hey, I want to spend $20 million and go build this plant over here, or I want to, you know, put this reactor in, because they remember, oh, well, 30 years ago when I was a young engineer, you know, I did the same thing, and I've seen those projects before. But what we're finding with these new technologies, and like specifically for me, data analytics, is that the way that we've done this in the past is none of our leadership has ever used any of these tools. They don't understand how they work. And what we've done is we've found champions at the site. And so we buy the software, we go train a few champions at each site, and then we kind of wipe our hands and walk away. And then you come back 5 years later, and those young engineers that you trained that got super excited all about it, you know, they maybe had a lot of success in their office, but they didn't really push it to the shop floor. They weren't change agents for it sometimes. They were more on the technical side, or they had a lot of success and left the company, or, you know, got a new job or got a promotion or something, and then it just kind of sank. So now we found some success with, you know, different pieces of technology from different sites, and we're trying to say, okay, we've had all these failures in the past, and how do we learn from that and kind of go forward? So that's where we're at. 18 globally.
Oh, you are? Okay. Yeah, so the problem is, do you go try to get 18 sites or 150 sites to all figure out how to do it? Or are there some things that are probably just best done at a different level with a kind of a degree of freedom from the sites? Because we got turnover. When you do really well at a site, when you get promoted and move to another site that's struggling, we shuffle those pieces around. So how do you build something that's sustainable? And so, you know, the approach we took was, well, let's build a layer above the sites to help augment where they struggle. And I say augment, I don't say replace. I say just help them do things that they struggle to do. And every site needs a little bit different type of help at a different depth, but build kind of a flexible way to offer them some services to help them be more successful. And then those things that you want to do that have an impact across the organization, you do them once for a site, but you do it in a central location, and then it gets really easy to scale it. You think about from across the enterprise, not 18 sites, but one enterprise, similar equipment, similar process. What are the problems that are similar, scalable? What are the things we only want to learn how to do once? And move those things kind of out of the plant. And that's part of the challenge, is learn how to do that. Move them out of the plant, and once you move them out of the plant, it gives you a lot more flexibility in how you solve the problem. And you can churn a little bit without disrupting operations. And so that's kind of how we tried to do it, was separate the experimentation from the shop floor.
So like a center of excellence.
Yeah, and we got 100 different names we were going to call it. Called it a remote operations center, and it created panic because that inspired horror stories of the past when we outsourced things to third parties and they let us down and we'd had a bad operation. So we talked about integrated operations center, and we're not operating from a remote location. So we tried like 100 different names, and we ended up we call ours a collaboration and support center. But it's not a thing, it's not a place, it's a way of thinking. We started as a place to get it going, but the reality is it's a nexus to connect a bunch of people to the problems. And there's a core group that sits there, and over time we hope to grow that to the point where it's just sort of a way that facilitates us to bring knowledge to the problems and not the problems, bring the problems to the people, not the people to the problems. And so right now it's just a building, but we're trying to get tentacles out across other companies in our family, and we're trying to make good connections with other centers of excellence that we have around the company. So we're trying to make it like a platform for doing things, not a center of excellence necessarily.
So one thing that we're doing, just for a different perspective, is, so we're a chemicals plant, and we have operators all around the world and maintenance people, and we all use the same data historian. Okay, we've been standardized on it for years. We're actually starting at what they know and building from there on what we want to do with data analytics. There's an awful lot you can do with visualization, and so we use pies as AF templates and then build into that. So we actually have a really good acceptance on the shop floor because we're just improving what they already have. If we go from process book to Pi Vision screens and AF templates, great. If we link in that maintenance history from SAP, that they know that as well. If we have suddenly added on self-service analytics, that's great. It's a nice little click, and it's really fast adopting. And so that's kind of where we're focused. And that's working for us. And all the fun stuff we want to do that costs big money, that needs IT to do something, we're still playing with that in the background, but we're not actually ready to implement.
I'd like to tie those two ideas together. The idea that you pre-invest in a platform, and we've done that, and that's been very successful. The unintended consequence is when that platform no longer meets your needs. Maybe it becomes old, difficult to support, doesn't have the functionality, but you've embedded this platform. You have tribes of people that are incentivized, that keep that platform alive. Leadership's used to talking about it. You have commercial agreements in place. And you get stuck in that. And I don't know how to get out of that problem. I know how to scale. I don't know what to do when it's time to move to the next S-curve and says this platform is no longer what we need because there's so much embedded energy, so much investment.
Yeah, so we're doing the same thing as well. We want the end user to all look and feel the same. We don't want 10 different applications. So on top of all this, we're actually going to have something like Power BI or whatever, some sort of web tool where we're interfacing to it. And so eventually, you know, the users they can get through to the data historian through Power BI in just a simple click. Our operators will still have their normal screens, but from up there. And then you can have anything come in and have that same look and feel. And that's kind of what you want to shoot for.
Yeah, I'm Alex Tate with Capstone Technology. I figured I'd just kind of share this story. It touches on a whole lot of things that we've been talking about kind of independently, talking about internal competition, talking about scalability at a level above and kind of the trickle down. I was working with a group and I would say they are very scalable. They've been very successful at it. They've done it very efficiently. I had an interesting thing. I do a lot of work in the multivariate space, so I work with a lot of data analytics groups and working on manufacturing problems, but I also do a lot of work kind of at the floor level, helping the manufacturing guys access those technologies. And I had a process engineer at a site give me a call, and he said, hey, you know, can you guys come out here and work with us on this problem? It's like, well, what are you looking for? It's like, well, our centralized technical group kind of identified us as an area of opportunity. And I said, okay, you know, what do you need help? He's like, well, we need to start modeling some things and figure out the problem. It's like, well, shouldn't they be helping you with that? You know, you have this central technical group. And he said, yeah, but they're trying to say we're doing bad and they won't talk to us about it. They won't talk to us about the problem. And so I want you to come in and help me find our problems before they do. And then conversely, the same technical group is reaching out to me and saying, hey, we don't have the manufacturing context with which to define this problem. We've got the data, but we don't know how to make it accessible to us. And so they're asking for the process context, unwilling to talk to their site. And, you know, here you are kind of stuck in the middle because they're both incentivized for the same reason, right? They've both identified the same problem, but instead of working together, no one wants to be wrong. So, interesting story. It all worked out in the end, but it was just kind of one of those things where, you know, when you start at a level, they're looking for things, and if it's not communicated all the way through effectively, then you get these barriers where people don't want to work together on it. So
That's where putting everyone in the same room helps with a whiteboard and an independent person saying, hey, let's write out your problem. And I've found time and time again that we're all saying the same thing, but we're using different words and a different perspective. But when we write it down and it's black and white, then we see it for what it is and it's easier to accept. So even if you're cross-country or whatever, there are ways and tools available to try and have that same conversation with people.
I would like to add on to that. I think like what you're hearing from everyone, it's all about the people, right? And we've been talking about this, all about organizational change and the people. And I want to go back to kind of a couple comments that were made in terms of we keep hitting on this, like the diversity of opinion as you're moving forward and the silos within your own. So I just love the talk about when we have our young engineers coming in, and that, we've often talked about mentoring. I'm the C-suite, right? So I'm the one that's always like, I have to push down like on what, I want. But when you implement, and all the companies that we work with, I can tell you some of the things where they became really successful. It's like people like to talk a lot about mentoring, favorite word, right? We all want to mentor. Do you realize there's a whole new trend about mentoring up? So as a CEO, I'm mentored a lot by down. So it's down coming up, kind of to your point about these young engineers that are going to say, hey, we want to do this. So it's not even just about the data, and you're gathering the data and you're making your decisions internally, but you really have to have that diversity. And I go back to this again and again, because you also don't know what you don't know. So I love the idea of you start with experimentation, right? Then you're going to pilots, then you're going to scale. Like, you haven't even started at the beginning on that experimentation, which is going to take a ton of diversity for you to really be successful, even whether it's a merger, an acquisition. I loved all the talk. It's all really about the people. So I just wanted to throw out there as something that's not sometimes discussed enough, how you are doing that co-communication, and we can push it down from the top, which we do, but just as much, mentoring is no longer a one-way street and looked at going down. It's all across and up is a big difference, I would say, as manufacturers are moving forward in Industry 4.0.
I think that's great. Just one thing. I think that's great that you say that. And actually, I encourage my people to argue with me. I tell them I'd like to argue. Please argue with me. And that helps open that discussion.
So one thing I'd like to explore when it comes to scalability, if you look at the scalability success stories that we have, they all have some things in common. One of them is sole source of the truth. That way, nobody, right, can argue it. The other thing is complete transparency. Because over time, what we realize that transparency changes behavior, and it makes everybody uncomfortable. And if you can get your organization comfortable with transparency, right? Because in all of this transformation, what happens is that operations gets drug out of the shadows, everything gets lit up, right? And all of a sudden, everybody sees all the stuff that you had buried that you didn't want everybody to see, that because it was buried and it was down, and you explained away why it was down, and you can't do that anymore. And now you got to deal with it. So it's no longer in the shadows. And so now you need help. And just the fact that we got to a sole source of the truth, where everybody's working from the same page, and we made it completely transparent through this collaboration and support center. And I think collaboration was a wonderful name, because it didn't feel very collaborative to start with, because there was a whole lot of friction at the plant because they panicked, right? When they figured out that we could see everything that was going on, there was a little bit of panic. But now it's a completely different mindset, right? Now it's like, come on, help me figure this stuff out, help me. And once they understand that, transparency turns. It becomes less threatening and more like help. But you have to get past that anxiety, right? And that's what makes scale go. And that's what changes behavior, is if you can get folks to the point that they're comfortable with transparency. And it scares all of us. So I think getting the problems right to start with, right? And then get to a sole source of truth, so that you end the debate early enough that you know what you're trying to achieve, and then make it transparent. Anybody got any stories about making things transparent? Because transparency changes behavior.
I do have a question about that, though. So when you went through that process of making things transparent, had you created an environment where, when the transparency occurs, there wouldn't be the idea of punitive reaction? Because, people think the reason why they want to hide stuff is because they're going to get in trouble.
We had to be careful about it. I'm very careful about it. I won't say that we were absolutely perfect about not having the wrong kind of actions in a few instances, but we quickly got on top of that. And at the end of the day, we worked through all of that, and we became really trusted and trust. Jim used the word trust, right? And if you put people in the situation where they work together day in and day out, that trust comes, especially when they have success at that kind of stuff, right? And that transparency. Because now what happens is that they're looking at things and they know somebody's got their back, right? So no longer do they feel that they have to sit and look at 500 things at the plant, right? And at the end of the day, we always ask ourselves that, what do you really want this technology to do for you? And maybe the answer is, and let's test this on everybody, I want it to tell me what it is I need to know that I don't know. And then what can I do about it? Because we see lots of folks come in, and they come in with something they want to show us, and on the page is a bunch of green stuff, right? And maybe a little old red thing in the corner. Well, I really don't want to see a metric that shows me a bunch of green stuff, because I really don't care about it. If it's green, okay. All I really want to know is, what do I need to know that I don't know? And what do I need to do about it? Because that's my precious resource. My precious resource is my people. So
I was going to say, Jane, Jim, Chandra, can you guys speak to that idea of, by its very nature, you're bringing people something, and Jonathan, you and I have had conversations about this. You're bringing something to somebody new and presenting it to them in a new way, and there's always going to be that pushback. There's always going to be that, no matter how good it is, there's always going to be that initial kind of, you're upsetting the apple cart, I don't like it. I know Mary Beth has dealt with this as well. What did you guys do? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that and try to, because that's a key to scale. It's the people thing, right? How do you convince them, to your point, that you're on board with them and it's a benefit to them when you have that initial conversation?
So one thing, it's like Jim was saying in the last session, was that have the same message, have the same flavor of ice cream every month, have the same consistent message. Don't be changing it every time you talk. And then also engage the people. What do you think works? What works for you, for your situation? Eventually everything will be persona-based, so let's fix it so you have what you need. And then also the transparency is very important. I think failure is a great thing because you learn from your mistakes. And and one of the things that people need is someone to take responsibility. So I just say, put my name by it. I'll take responsibility for you. You go on and do your thing. We'll work on it. And that actually bridges a lot of problems.
I will add to that in that I think the consistency, what you talked about, but when you talk about another angle, when you talk about digital or you talk about cyber, transparency to me also means visibility. So again, we're manufacturers, right? In general, we're making products. How do you make digital visible? How do you make your cyber things visible? How do you make these changes visible? And that's about, when you talk transparency, it's about visible. So to answer that question, like how are we bringing people along from all levels? It's actually, I told you about this, you have to actually demonstrate it. That's why I think it's so important to do test beds. I think it's so important to do convening and playbooks. Like, I think that's critical. It's going to get you to your answer and to your return on your investment faster. Which is where we're at. It's about the speed, I think, of change. So anything that can be made visible to everyone on the shop floor, and honestly, made visible to the executives. We like to all talk about the shop floor, and I got to show it to them how it works. I'm telling you, as an executive, I also want to go see if If I'm going to give you your 1.2 million to go fail, go show me something. Show me even the failure. And I'm like, okay, I get it. Now I can help her figure out where you go to the next thing. So how do you visually, even if you just take a slice, maybe it's logistics or it's something that's not about the plant floor, because you also only know what you know. So when you look at it from a higher level, you're like, where should you invest and pilot into scale? Pick something maybe that's not as critical too, that you can have different failures on. But that's what I would say. Transparency to me means visibility, and the best way to bring people along at every level, from the lowest to the highest, is to visibly try to make that digital thread or what the problems are come alive and see the solution. So I'm not even as much on the whiteboard even, or paper or data or numbers. Like, I'm visual, like I need to see it. And that's what I feel that most of the teams need to do as well. So kind of a different take on how do you bring those people along.
Yeah, so I got one thing that I could add to that. You're exactly right. Bringing everybody along at the same time. We started the transformation buzzword, and it went on for 18 months, and nobody knew what the hell that it meant. But everybody said it because they wanted to be a part of it. But nobody really knew what it meant. And when you start talking to the people that work for you, that work with you, that work on the shop floor, or they're in marketing at the home office, and you say, well, what does transformation mean to you? Well, I don't really know. But they're worried. And so why would they be worried? Because they're afraid something's going to replace them. Does anybody else get that? Right? Sees shaking heads. So I think that's a huge thing, that from an employee experience standpoint, that as you go through this transformation, we have to involve them. We have to tell them, this is what the terms are. This is what new things you're going to hear. This is what it means to you, and this is what it's going to mean to your job. Well, is it going to take my job? Robots going to take my job? Probably not, but might. But if it does, then we want you to go and learn what about these other new jobs that are going to be coming available, because we don't want to lose you. We've got 40% that we're losing to retirement. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm just saying that we had people walking around and they were like zombie-eyed. They had no idea what it really meant to them and their jobs. Everybody was nervous, right? So
You two teed me up perfectly. Because one of the things I was really passionate about when we were doing some of our first broad implementations was telling success stories. A one slide of this person saw this and plot, and then they did that, and then this got better. And because I was embedded with the people early on, I was very embedded with the people. Their lives were changing and they didn't even realize it. So I was the one who would see sort of what they did, and then I would write it down. And because this digital thing that nobody really knows what is, that was an example of, well, this is how you really use this thing. You see a thing, you do this, blah, blah, blah. And so those success stories were really, really powerful in our scaling.
So I want to ask another question. Are there any solution providers in the room? Okay. I would love to get your take on what scalability looks like to you, how you work into the process, what your observations are in terms of people trying to scale. Because yes, it's not about the technology, it's about the people, but then you're bringing the technology to the people and you have to live with those results. Sometimes not as, sometimes poorly reflected upon you when maybe it's not, you being the cause. What's your take on things? How do you view scalability? What do you see working? What do you see not working, and why? And I'll take anybody that's brave enough to jump up.
Yeah, I'll take that. Andy Bain with Element. So it can't be about the technology. When we're working with customers like Jane and her team at Covestro, it's about bringing together the people, the process, and the technology. Nobody wants to be necessarily transformed or innovated on, right? Those are uncomfortable words, as you just alluded to. Especially when you say all. Right, exactly. Thank you, Mike. And the way that they encode information in their brains, and they've worked in the plant for so many years, it's very threatening, number one. When we think about scalability, it's the idea of think big, sure, but start small and go fast. And in order to do that, you really have to engage at the people level, number one. Secondly, you got to have some compelling business cases, and it's got to make sense, as you alluded to. And it doesn't matter what it is. It could be OEE use cases or CBM, whatever. Don't focus on the technology. And get it done right in a meaningful way, but then as you think about scaling, and the scale problem that we tend to focus on is how you can converge IT and OT data at scale. You first got to prove that with your vendor partners. And your vendors, including Element, our expectation is that we have to earn the right to innovate with our customers. And so we fully expect that we have to go out and prove it in some small way before we can scale it up. So it's very much cultural, organizational. We do a lot of design thinking with our customers and really engage in discussions about what's the best thing to get done first, because you can actually get it done and prove value. And then, quite frankly, another part of scaling is sort of internal marketing. One of our customers, BP, we spend a fair amount of time working with their DataWorks team and their upstream digital on putting together like marketing sheets about work that we've done just to get the word out and get people comfortable in their language. And so as a solution provider, we fully expect that we want to work with our customers to help them start telling success stories that can become meaningful to the people that they work with, and do it in language that makes sense to them. And so those are just a few thoughts. Is that helpful?
Yeah. I'll try and take a stab at this. I'm Naveen from Infor. I'll try and talk about this from two different perspectives that I've seen. Thank you. So one example was sort of a large ERP transformation, global ERP transformation project, where the customer sort of identified the pilot plant, and they brought us in along with a bunch of other people from their company, the global consulting firm that they were working with, and they laid out the entire plan to us to say that, this is what we've done so far for the past 20 years, and why is it not working? How have we benchmarked this plant and all other plants, and what's our goal in the next 3 to 5 years? Where do we want to be? And even before we get there, we want to prove out this plan can go where we want to go, and then scale that out to different places. And the way they did that, by bringing all the experts into this one plan, and then proving it over there to say, no customizations, no things that we did in the past that kind of bottlenecked our growth. Let's avoid those, and how do we grow in a different manner? And what was great about that project was they picked people from different parts of the world, different plants, cross-functional teams, so everybody had skin in the game, but it was led by their C-level executive. So they would go to the plant for weeks together, sit there, work with the managers, work with the plant folks, to see how this transformation was going, and would bring us along with them to say that, solve these problems here, so when we get to other plants, we're not trying to solve the same problems over and over again. So that was one thing. The takeaway for us out of those activities was, how do we build a templatized approach for other customers, right? So I know every customer comes to us and says they're a unique snowflake, and they are. Every business is unique, but there are common processes and tools that customers use across the board. So we always go and say, well, here's an 80% approach for you, right? Based on your vertical, based on your industry. We understand you're an aerospace and defense manufacturing customer within this particular vertical, and we have X number of other customers who have done this. Here's the 80% approach that will get you where you want to go. Here's how you start. But there are 20% other things we understand that may not be common for you. And let's account for those, as opposed to starting from level 1 and getting to all the different problems you're trying to solve. So we call those as implementation accelerators. and we keep refining them based on other implementations that we do in that particular vertical or that industry. So.
Hey, I'm sorry. I just want to double down on what Naveen said. I know I'm not a solutions provider, but the comment about the 80% that's the same. So one of the things that I've realized over the last couple of years is every time I go solve a problem with scalability in mind, and you ask engineers, and that's we have a lot of engineers, people solving problems, and you say, hey, I want to go do this, and I want to build it from day one to be flexible and scalable and extensible. The first thing they start doing is making a list of all the reasons why that won't work, right? You guys all been, that's how we're trained in school, right? You're trained to understand all the potential downfalls or errors in your ways for process design and design of equipment and whatever. And so it's wired into your brain to just start listing the problems. And so I usually sit around and let that go on, and I write them down on the board, and I draw a big circle around that and go, all right, well, let's pretend that those aren't problems anymore. Now what will we do? And eventually, if you do that a couple of times, you get to the point where they're like, all right, well, in actuality, it's like 65, 70% of what we're trying to do is actually really, really scalable. So let's do that, and let's not make the problem so complicated, because if we build enough flexibility and agility in our organization, we can do little pieces of the problem solution, one little piece at a time, and then go back afterwards and fill all the gaps. And do those as one-offs and let those be solved locally rather than centrally as a one-size-fits-all. So I think I like the way you're thinking about it. So, and welcome to the family, by the way.
Guys, I was just about to chime in as well. I think what we found as a success out in the field is, each plant is not created equal. Everybody's on their own separate journey. So I think the key to our success and the success of our partners is understanding where the lowest hanging fruit is. Get some wins there, build on that, then grow towards solving asset class problems. And then from there, then you get into this digital transformation, talk about optimizing systems. That's where, Chandra was talking about, you engage your frontline people. I mean, my goodness, you guys have people out there that have been working for 20, 30, 40 years on the front line that they know their equipment more than they know, like, their spouse. They've got input. So that's the one thing that I think we have found as a partner for our companies is that we're trying to engage the frontline people, the frontline operators, because they have ideas. They have theories on how they can run their system better. It's just you need to engage with them and find that information out. Once you do that, then you can start building in, machine learning, big data analysis, but it all goes back to the front line. I mean, they know so much, and it's just a matter of just soaking up all that information, so.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's what's working for us as well, is we have built what we want to do, and with the people in the field, the shop floor.
Yeah, I hate to beat a dead horse that's already been beaten, but kind of the way I always end up having to put it is the idea of corporate uniformity but local flexibility. I can't tell you how many times you go in and they're like, this is the way, and we just kind of roll that out. But how many times have we gone into plants where there's the same thing? These two pieces of equipment were built at the same time by the same people. They're 20 feet apart and they operate differently. And there's this tendency to kind of over-define everything we're trying to scale because we're doing it from the top. Now, I think that's the right way, but it always seems like we always have a tendency to go a little too far. We take away the flexibility before finding out how much flexibility we really need down there. So I guess that would be probably the biggest issue I see is just the tendency to over-define your solution before you get to the level where you even need to tackle that problem. You're fighting about pennies when you're giving up how much money on the other end. So,
okay, so you want to talk? Yeah, I'm just going to make a quick comment. I've been a solution provider for about 20 years in both the IT and OT space, and I think the three things that I've learned that have helped me be successful in implementing solutions is knowing the difference between data, information, and actionable information. The second one is recognizing that there's a difference between management and leadership. You can have a lot of leaders inside of your organization that have absolutely no authority, but just their actions and modeling themselves as leaders can actually inspire people to work on solutions. Oh, and I forgot the third thing. There we go. I got 2 out of 3. So I'll remember the third thing at lunch. That's right. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right?
So, how many folks in here can draw? Come on, come on. All right, that's better. How many can sing? What are you going to do that you weren't going to do when you came in here? What are you going to do? None of this works if you don't do something differently after you leave. So what are you going to do? You're going to do
Remember,
something different, right?
Anything is possible.
You're going to do something different. You're going to work on the problem, right? You're going to think a little differently, work on the problem, right? Going to use sole source of the truth and drive transparency, because all of that stuff enables you to scale. And you're going to go find peers, because what did I say my grandfather said? Show me your friends and I'll show you your future, right? So if you change your peer group, you really will change your future, right? And that's what this is really about.
And the third thing is learn how to manage people. So managing people is extremely important. And as practitioners and engineers, we don't really think about applying science to actual, how do you interact with people? And there's science behind it. So, setting up structured meetings and how to effectively manage people is extremely important. Switch is a great book if you want to learn techniques and strategies for, helping you interact and deal with sometimes people that can be obstacles to success in your project. So, sorry about that.
That's all right. You didn't have to wait. You didn't have to wait till lunch. I like that. So, if anybody has any closing comments, I do want to make sure that you get your say. Anybody? Just raise your hand if you do. If not, that's fine too. So, first of all, thanks. We really appreciate it. I know this was a little bit of a different structure. Not that every session we would have at the forum would be this way, but I'm just a big believer in talking, with people, because you just learn so much more than sitting and watching and just hearing all day long. So it's that interaction, I think, that's so beneficial. So normally I would have probably let this run just another minute or two, because we are at 11:56. But what I'd like to do is, my guess is based on some of the comments that were made and some of the folks that are here, and I'll single out Carl as well, that, Carl, Chandra, Jim, Mike, Jane, they are fantastic resources. Meet them. Take a minute or two. If there's somebody that said something that you want to hear more about, connect with them, share a card, get their contact information, and just keep going. So I want to at least give you guys a minute or two before we officially break for lunch, just so that you guys can make some introductions among yourselves. Thanks very much to Mike and Jane. Thank you to Chandra. Jim, thank you to everybody for your great input. Really appreciate it. Thank you.